Good morning. Good evening. Good afternoon. And remember, context is everything. Media Network. Founder and CEO John Michael is reading a textbook, cover to cover. Today, we are on Chapter 27, Section 4, World War I. Yesterday, methods of war in World War I. Today, winning the war. Are we resolving it this soon? We talked 200 pages about how we got to the World War, and it's been 7 pages. And we're going to resolve the war already? Winning the war, Section 4? Well, let's see. Setting the scene. By 1917, European societies were cracking under the strain of war. Instead of praising the glorious deeds of heroes, war poets began denouncing the leaders whose errors wasted so many lives. British poet and soldier Siegfried Sassoon captured the bitter mood. You smug-faced crowds with kindling eye, who cheer when soldier lads march by, sneak home and pray you'll never know the hell where youth and laughter go. Siegfried Sassoon, from his work Suicide in the Trenches. Total War. New heading. As the struggle wore on, nations realized that a modern mechanized war required a total commitment to their whole society. The result was what we call today total war. The channeling of a nation's entire resources into a war effort. Economic impact of total war. Early on, both sides set up systems to recruit, arm, transport, and supply armies that numbered in the millions. All of the warring nations, except Britain, imposed universal military conscription, or the draft, which required all young men to be ready for the military or other service. Germany set up a system that forced civilian labor as well. Governments raised taxes and borrowed huge amounts of money to pay the cost of war. They rationed food and other products, from boots to gasoline. In order, they introduced the other economic controls, such as setting prices and forbidding strikes. Propaganda war. Total war meant controlling public opinion. Even in democratic countries, special boards censored the press. Their aim was to keep complete casualty figures and other discouraging news from reaching the people. Government censors also restricted popular literature, historical writings, motion pictures, and the arts. Sounds like censorship. Both sides waged propaganda war. Propaganda is the spread of ideas to promote a cause or damage an opposing cause. Allied propaganda often played up Germany's invasion of Belgium as a barbarous act. The British and French press circulated tales of atrocities, horrible acts against innocent people. Often, these stories were greatly exaggerated or completely made up. In Germany, propagandists encouraged people to sing hymns of hate against the British. Hate by water and hate by land. Hate of the head and hate of the hand. We love as one, we hate as one, and we have one foe and one alone. England. That was a German. Ernst Lisieux, Hymn of Hate. Bizarre. bizarre. Impact on women. Women played a critical role in total war. As millions of men left to fight, women took over their jobs and kept national economies going. Many women worked in war industries, manufacturing weapons and supplies. Others joined women's branches of the armed forces. When food shortages threatened Britain, volunteers in the women's land army went on the fields to grow their nation's food. Nurses shared the dangers of the men whose wounds they tended. At aid stations close to the front lines, nurses often worked around the clock, especially after big push brought a flood of casualties. In her diary, English nurse Vera Brittain describes sweating through 90-degree days in France. Stopping hemorrhages, replacing intestines, and draining and reinserting innumerable rubber tubes, with gruesome human remains heaped on the floor. War work gave women a new sense of pride and confidence. After the war, most women had to give up their jobs and men returning home. Still, they had challenged the ideas that women were too delicate for demanding and dangerous jobs. In many countries, including Britain and the United States, women's support of the war effort helped them finally win the right to vote after decades of struggle. New heading. Collapsing morale. Choose Aldi's. Collapsing morale. New heading. By 1917, the morale of both troops and civilians had plunged. Germany was sending 15-year-old recruits to the front. Britain was on the brink of bankruptcy. Long casualty lists, food shortages, and failure of generals to win promised victories led to calls for peace. As morale collapsed, troops mutinied in some French units. In Italy, many soldiers deserted during the retreat at Caporetto. In Russia, soldiers left the front to join a full-scale revolution back home. Revolution in Russia. Full-scale revolution that they left for. 3 years of war had hit Russia especially hard. Stories of incompetent generals and corruption destroyed public confidence. By March 1917, bread riots in St. Petersburg mushroomed into a revolution that brought down the Russian monarchy. You will read more about the causes and effects of the Russian Revolution in the next chapter. So keep listening. Subscribe. Like. John Michael. Context is Everything Media Network. Thank you. At first, the Allies welcomed the overthrow of the Tsar, Russian king. They hoped Russia would institute a democratic government and become a stronger ally. But later that year, when V.I. Lenin came to power, he promised to pull Russian troops out of the war. Early in 1918, Lenin signed a Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany. The treaty ended Russian participation in World War I. Impact on the war. Russia's withdrawal had an immediate impact on the war. With Russia out of the struggle, Germany could concentrate on its forces in the Western Front. In the spring of 1918, the Central Powers, who were the Germans and the Italians, stood ready to achieve great breakthrough they had sought so long. United States declares war. Soon after the Russian Revolution began, however, another event altered the balance of forces. The United States declared war on Germany. Why did the United States exchange neutrality for war in 1917? Restricted submarine warfare. Unrestricted, rather. One major reason involved German submarine attacks on merchant passenger ships carrying American citizens. Many of these ships were transporting supplies to the Allies, but President Woodrow Wilson insisted that Americans, as citizens of a neutral country, had the right to safe travel in the seas. In May 1915, a German submarine torpedoed a British liner, the Lusitania. Almost 1,200 passengers were killed, including 128 Americans. Germany justified the attack, arguing that the Lusitania was carrying weapons. When Wilson threatened to cut off relations with Germany, though, Germany agreed to restrict the submarine campaign. Before attacking, any U-boats would surface and give warning, allowing neutral passengers to escape to lifeboats. In December 1916, however, Germany announced that it would resume unrestricted submarine warfare. Wilson angrily denounced Germany. Cultural ties. Many Americans supported the Allies. They felt ties of culture and language to Britain and sympathized with French as another democracy. Still, some German Americans favored the Central Powers. So did many Irish Americans who resented British rule of Ireland, and Russian Jewish immigrants who did not want to be allied with the Tsar. Zimmermann note. In early 1917, the British intercepted a message from German Foreign Minister Otto Zimmermann to his ambassador in Mexico. Zimmermann promised that in return for Mexican support, Germany would help Mexico to reconquer the lost territory in New Mexico, Texas, and Arizona. Britain revealed that Zimmermann's note to the American government. When the note became public, anti-German feelings intensified in the United States. Declaring war. In April 1917, Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany. "We have no selfish ends to serve," he stated. Instead, he painted a conflict idealistically as a war to make the world safer for democracy, and as a war to end war. First, the United States needed months to recruit, train, supply, and transport a modern army across the Atlantic. In 1918, about 2 million fresh, confident American soldiers had joined the war-weary Allied troops fighting on the Western Front. Although relatively few American troops got into combat, they proved to be good fighters. Their arrival gave Allied troops a much-needed morale boost, just as important to the debt-ridden Allies as the financial aid provided by the United States. The 14 points. Though he had failed to maintain American neutrality, Wilson still hoped to be a peacemaker. In January 1918, he issued the 14 points, a list of his terms for resolving this and future wars. He calls for the end to secret treaties, freedom of the seas, free trade, large-scale reductions of arms. For Eastern Europe, Wilson favored self-determination, the right of people to choose their own form of government. All those issues he felt had helped cause the war. Finally, he urged the creation of a general association of nations to keep the peace in the future. That didn't work, and it still doesn't work. Evidenced by constant war ever since. So, make of it what you will. Evidence is there. Campaign to victory. Heading. A final showdown got underway in the early 1800s. In March, the Germans launched a huge offensive that pushed the Allies back 40 miles by July. But the effort exhausted the Germans. The Allies then launched a counterattack, slowly driving German forces back across France and Belgium. In September, German generals told the Kaiser that the war could not be won. The German people showed their monarch their frustration as uprisings exploded across the hungry city dwellers. German commanders advised the Kaiser to step down, as the Tsar had done. William II did so in early November, fleeing into exile in the Netherlands. By autumn, Austria-Hungary was also reeling towards collapse. As the government in Vienna tottered, the subject nationalities revolted, splintering the empire of the Habsburgs. The new German government sought an armistice, or an agreement to end fighting with the Allies at 11 a.m. on November 11th, 1918. The Great War had at last come to an end. Now, that was very quick. The 200 pages of buildup for about, let's call it 10 pages of war talk, not what I expected. Expected more. Either way, I think that we can all agree that Woodrow Wilson and the founding of the United Nations and the following treaty that we're going to read about tomorrow didn't work. God bless. Goodbye. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm open to it.